Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales. The trucks came without headlights. That was the first thing Jack noticed. He was already awake, had been for an hour, sitting in the dark kitchen with cold coffee and the particular kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace. Rex had woken him, not with barking, just by standing at the bedroom door, completely still, staring at nothing Jack could see. After 20 years in the army, Jack had learned to trust that more than any alarm system ever built. He moved to the window without turning on a light. 3 sets of headlights killed before they reached the gravel road. 3 dark shapes rolling slowly through the field's edge like shadows that had learned to drive. Unhurried, confident. The confidence of men who believed they were coming for something that couldn't fight back. Jack watched them for exactly 4 seconds. Then he reached down and placed his hand on Rex's head. "I know, buddy," he said quietly. "I see them." Rex didn't bark. He looked up at Jack with those steady amber eyes and pressed his body gently against Jack's leg, not out of fear, out of something older than fear, something that said, "Wherever you go, I go." Jack exhaled slowly. He had spent 20 years learning how to breathe in moments like this, how to let the heart slow down instead of racing, how to turn everything cold and clear and purposeful. It was the one skill the army gave him that he had never asked for and could never return. He whispered one last thing before he moved. "Stay close." But to understand what happened that night, you have to go back further. You have to go back to a small farmhouse at the edge of a gravel road where a man and his dog spent most mornings doing nothing more complicated than watching the sun come up. Jack Thompson was 50 years old, though some mornings felt considerably older. He had the kind of face that had been weathered slowly, not by vanity or worry, but by time spent outdoors doing honest work. His hands were thick and scarred. His eyes were the pale gray of a winter sky, and they had the particular stillness of someone who had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. He had served 2 decades in the United States Army. He had been deployed to places most Americans couldn't find on a map, in conditions most people couldn't survive in their imagination. He had been one of the finest long-range marksmen his unit had ever produced, a fact recorded in classified files that no one in this small corner of rural America would ever read. When he came home, he came here, to the land his father left him. The farmhouse was small and weathered, practical in the way that honest things tend to be. A wooden porch faced fields that stretched farther than the eye could see. The barn behind it was old but solid. The fences were his father's work, every post hammered in by hands that Jack still missed with a grief that had never fully named itself. Henry Thompson had been a quiet man who loved this land the way some men love their children, completely, without needing to explain it. He had farmed it for 40 years, raised Jack on it, and was buried on the hill behind the north pasture beneath a simple stone that said only his name and the years he lived. He had died in a car accident 7 years ago. That was what the report said. Brake failure on the county highway, a tragedy, a terrible loss. Jack had accepted that for 7 years because grief doesn't ask questions. Grief just sits beside you in the dark and breathes. Rex was the one thing that made the silence bearable. The German shepherd had come to Jack 3 years after he returned home, lean and alert, with intelligent amber eyes that seemed to understand things that words couldn't reach. Rex followed Jack everywhere, through the fields, through the barn, down the gravel road into town and back again. On the mornings when the weight of everything felt heaviest, Rex would simply sit beside him on the porch steps and lean his warm body against Jack's leg, as if to say, "You're still here, I'm still here. That's enough for now." It was, most days. Most days that was enough. The first sign that something was wrong came from Rex. Not from a stranger, not from a letter or a phone call. From a dog standing at the edge of the north field at 2 in the morning, staring into the tree line with the focused, unblinking attention of an animal that knows something is already in motion. Jack followed him out the next morning and found what Rex had already known was there. Tire tracks, deep ones, made by heavy equipment, and metal survey stakes driven into the soil along the tree line with a precision that had nothing to do with farming. Jack spent that evening in the barn office, going through the old ledger boxes his father had kept stacked on a shelf for 40 years. He almost missed it. A folded geological survey tucked between tax receipts and seed purchase records, dated 12 years earlier. He read it 3 times under the bare bulb above the desk. Beneath the farmland, beneath the fields his father had plowed and the fences he had built, and the hill where he was buried, lay a natural gas deposit large enough to make the property worth more than Jack could calculate standing in a cold barn at midnight. His father had known. Jack stared at the paper for a long time. Rex sat beside him and watched his face. A week later, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. The man who stepped out was wearing a suit that cost more than most people in this county made in a month. He had a polished smile and cold eyes, and he introduced himself as Cal Briggs, representing a land acquisition company that Jack had never heard of. He placed a thick envelope on the porch railing. "Mr. Thompson, we'd like to make your life considerably easier." Jack didn't touch the envelope. He looked at it. Then he looked at Briggs. "How'd you find out about the deposit?" Jack asked. Something moved behind the man's eyes, just briefly. "I'm sorry?" "The gas deposit under my land. How long have you known about it?" Briggs smiled again, smoother this time. "The offer inside is very generous. I'd encourage you to read it before—" "I read the geological survey," Jack said quietly. "My father filed mineral rights on this property 12 years ago. I found the documentation last week." A long pause. "Mr. Thompson, the offer—" "You can leave now," Jack said. He picked up the envelope, walked to the wood stove inside the front door, and dropped it in without opening it. He stood there until he heard the SUV back out of the driveway. Rex sat beside him the entire time, watching the flames take the paper down to nothing. Neither of them said anything. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way that felt deliberately constructed. People Jack had known for years began to behave strangely. The cashier at the feed store stopped making small talk. The man at the gas station found reasons to look away when Jack walked in. Even the county clerk seemed uncomfortable processing the mineral rights paperwork, though she processed it. Jack recognized the sensation. In war, men sometimes grew distant from the soldiers they believed wouldn't survive the next operation. It wasn't cruelty. It was the self-protection of people who had already been told how the story would end. Someone had already told this town how his story would end. Then the sabotage began. His truck tire failed on the highway, a clean slice, the kind that doesn't happen on its own. His water line was cut in the night. Tools disappeared from the barn. Small things at first, calculated things, the kind of pressure designed to make a man feel slowly surrounded without being able to point at a single moment and say, "There, that's when it started." But the morning that broke something open inside him was different. Rex began barking just after dawn, wild and urgent, near the goat pen at the edge of the south field. Jack ran out in his boots without lacing them, moving fast across the frost-stiff grass. One of his goats lay on its side in the dirt. Not injured, not frightened, gone. Jack knelt beside the animal and didn't move for a long time. Rex sat beside the goat and whined softly, a low, heartbroken sound that had no words but needed none. He put his nose down gently near the animal's face and then looked up at Jack with eyes that held something very close to sorrow. "I know," Jack said. His voice was steady. Everything inside him was not. He buried the goat himself before noon, in the corner of the south field under the oak tree where she used to stand in the afternoon shade. He marked the spot with a flat stone. He didn't speak over it. He had run out of words for losses that shouldn't have happened. That evening, he went to the basement. He unlocked the long steel cabinet he hadn't opened since returning home. Inside, wrapped in clean cloth and carefully maintained, was his rifle. Beside it, folded in a waterproof case, were maps of the property, notes, measurements, everything a man who had spent 2 decades studying terrain needed to turn familiar land into a defensive position. Rex watched from the doorway as Jack laid everything on the workbench. "One more time," Jack said quietly, to himself, to the rifle, to the memory of every person who had ever taught him how to survive. "One more time." The next 4 days were methodical and silent. Trip alarms went in along the fence lines, thin wire, barely visible, connected to flares. Cameras appeared inside weathered birdhouses positioned at every approach. The old grain silo became an observation post with a clean sight line covering every road leading to the house. The irrigation trench along the east field offered a natural covered approach route that an untrained eye would never identify as a defensive position. Rex patrolled with him every night, the two of them moving through the dark together, the dog's ears rotating like sensors, his nose reading the air constantly. More than once, Rex stopped and stared toward the road with that particular stillness that meant something was out there, watching back. Jack would crouch beside him in the dark. "Not yet," he'd whisper. Rex would hold still for another long moment, then look up at Jack, then continue walking. They were ready before the men with trucks ever knew they were coming. They came on a Thursday night, just after midnight. 9 men, 3 trucks with killed headlights. They moved with the easy arrogance of people who had done this before and never been answered for it. The first flare went up from the east fence when the lead man hit the tripwire. The crack of Jack's rifle from the silo came 3 seconds later, splitting the silence wide open. What followed was not a movie. It was not dramatic or glorious. It was a cold, controlled, deeply serious piece of work carried out by a man who had trained for exactly this kind of night and prayed his entire life that he would never need to use it again. Jack moved through the dark like he was part of it, low, deliberate, communicating with Rex through the small signals they had built together over years. A hand gesture, a quiet word, a pause. Rex moved beside him and around him, his growl dropping to a warning rumble whenever someone approached too close from behind. Men retreated, men fell, the confusion of flares and darkness, and a defender who knew every inch of the ground undid what 9 armed men and 3 trucks had come to accomplish. But during the chaos, 3 of them slipped into the house through the back. Rex heard them before Jack did. The dog's body went rigid, one short, thunderous bark. Jack was through the back door in seconds. What happened inside the house in those next few minutes was desperate and close, and nothing like distant shooting. It was the kind of fighting a man does when he is protecting the last place on earth that means something to him. Room to room, smoke and adrenaline, and the sound of Rex's bark filling the narrow hallway like a force of nature. When the silence finally came back, it came back completely. Cal Briggs sat bound to a chair in the barn, illuminated by a single work light. Two of his men sat on the floor beside him. The rest had either fled into the dark or were waiting quietly for law enforcement in the way that men wait when they understand their situation entirely. Jack sat across from them on an overturned feed bucket. Rex lay beside him, eyes open, watching. Jack didn't speak for a long time. He simply set a small digital recorder on the barn floor between them and pressed play. Radio chatter from the attack filled the barn. Names, instructions, the voice of someone far away from the violence, directing it. Briggs stared at the recorder. Jack looked at him. "You want to tell me who that is?" Jack said quietly, "or do you want to wait and see what a federal prosecutor does with it?" It wasn't the older men who broke. It was the youngest one, barely past 25, sitting against the wall with blood on his sleeve and something terrified and ashamed moving across his face. "It goes back years," the young man said, his voice cracked. "The whole county, the land office, the water board. There's a list of properties. Yours was the last one." Jack didn't move. "My father's land," he said. The young man looked at the floor. "Your father found the deposit first. He filed the rights. He wouldn't sell." A long pause. "They said the break job was handled by someone the county sheriff knew." The barn went very quiet. Rex lifted his head and looked at Jack. Jack sat completely still for a long time. The work light hummed. Outside, the wind moved through the fields, the same fields his father had plowed, the same gravel road his father had driven on the last morning of his life. 7 years of grief shifted inside Jack Thompson's chest, slowly, the way a locked door shifts when the right key finally touches it. He didn't cry. He just sat there and breathed. And then he reached down and placed his hand on Rex's head. Rex pressed upward into his palm. The evidence package went to investigative journalists and federal prosecutors simultaneously. Recordings, documents, survey records, and 3 men willing to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. Federal agents moved within 3 weeks, coordinated arrests across 4 counties, energy company executives, county officials, a sheriff who had filed a clean accident report on a brake failure he had personally arranged. When agents arrived at the Thompson farm, Jack was standing at the gate with Rex beside him. 3 prisoners waited in the barn, alive, unharmed, ready to face whatever courts existed for men like them. The lead agent shook Jack's hand and looked at him for a moment longer than was strictly professional. "You did this right," the agent said. Jack nodded once. That was all. In the months that followed, Jack established the Thompson Land Trust, a non-profit legal organization designed to protect rural farmland from fraudulent acquisition schemes. He hired 2 attorneys and a land rights advocate, and spent the better part of a year transferring the legal framework across the region. He refused every interview request. He turned down a documentary offer without reading it fully. The only new structure he built on the property was a small, quiet retreat house at the edge of the south field. 4 rooms, a wood stove, a covered porch facing the pasture. For veterans who needed somewhere still and safe to breathe for a while. He never announced it. Word traveled the way honest things travel. Quietly, person to person, through the kind of trust that can't be manufactured. On an October morning, with the light coming in low and gold across the hills, Jack walked up to the north pasture, with Rex moving ahead of him through the tall grass, nose down, tail moving slowly like a flag in light wind. He knelt beside his father's headstone and stayed there for a while, without speaking. The wind came through the tree line the way it always had, soft and unhurried, as though it had all the time in the world. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small flash drive. He placed it beneath the base of the stone, pressed into the soil. Everything on it, every recording, every document, every name. Proof. Justice. "They came for the land, Dad," Jack said quietly. "Thought I'd walk away." Rex came and lay down beside him, his warm body against Jack's knee, his chin resting on his front paws. "Took me 7 years to understand what really happened." His voice was low and even, the way voices get when they are carrying something enormous and finally learning how to set it down. "I'm sorry it took that long." The wind moved through the grass. "But you raised a soldier, so I finished it." He stayed on that hill for a long time, long enough for the grief to finally feel like something other than an open wound, long enough for it to begin, just barely, just quietly, to feel like memory instead. Rex never moved from his side. That evening, Jack planted new seedlings along the eastern field's edge, working slowly down the row in the fading light. Rex dug enthusiastically beside him, enormous, clumsy holes that bore no relationship to where the seeds needed to go, and wagged his tail each time as though he had done something extraordinarily helpful. Jack looked at him and laughed. A real laugh. Quiet, short, and completely genuine. The kind that surprises you when it comes. "You're terrible at this," he told Rex. Rex wagged his tail harder and dug another hole in entirely the wrong place. Jack shook his head and kept planting. The fields stretched out around them in the evening quiet. The farmhouse light was on behind them. The hill where his father rested was dark against the pale sky. And somewhere beneath all that ordinary earth lay the thing that men had killed for, still there, unmoved, indifferent to everything that had happened above it. But the land itself felt different now, not silent, not heavy. Peaceful, the way land feels when the people who love it are still standing on it. The war for this place was over. The truth about his father had finally seen the light, and the man who had come home from war carrying a grief too large to name had found, in the most unlikely way, what he had quietly been searching for since the day he drove back down this gravel road. Not an ending, a reason to stay. Because real courage isn't always loud. It doesn't always wear a uniform or stand in the light. Sometimes it looks like a man on a quiet porch at dawn, drinking cold coffee with a loyal dog pressed against his leg, carrying everything he's lost and choosing every single morning to still be here. Jack Thompson never asked to be a hero. He only ever asked to be left in peace on land his father loved. But when they came for that land, when they came for his father's memory and his family's name and the last quiet place he had left in this world, he stood in the dark without flinching. Not for glory, not for recognition, for the fence posts his father hammered in, for the dog sleeping beside him who had never once stopped believing in him, for the simple, unbreakable idea that some things are worth protecting completely and without compromise. If that kind of loyalty still matters to you, if you believe that quiet men sometimes carry the deepest courage, and that justice, even when it comes late, still means something, then you belong here. Subscribe to Jack and Rex Tales. Every story on this channel is a reminder that loyalty is still real, sacrifice still matters, and the bond between a man and his dog is one of the most honest things left in this world. Jack and Rex will be here. We'll see you next time.